properly afraid of me. But the real truth is that it's not really a hackers conference. It's more appropriately an IT security or an IT tech conference, and it's actually 2 conferences in one, because there's a lot of tech conferences. It starts with trainings, and there are 3 of these conferences that are held globally. We just did the one in, earlier in the spring. We were in Singapore in March, because of course, why wouldn't you be in Singapore in March? The BlackHat USA event is in Vegas in July, again, of course, because what better time to be in Las Vegas than in the midst of 113-degree weather, 55-degree weather if you speak Celsius. And then the 3rd event of the year, it will be in London this year for EMEA, and of course that will be in December. So just so you know, the BlackHat planners take weather into account, of course. But so for all of these events, the first 2 to 4 days, it involves just training sessions, and then the second part of the show is briefing sessions, and then of course the business hall. And from an engineer's point of view, in terms of supporting a network, these are very different events, and so the traffic types and the traffic amounts vary widely. But first, let's talk about who. So I said it's not really a hackers event, but this is the cliche, of course, that all of the attendees are evil and young. The young part is correct, and they get younger, at least for me, every year. And so rather than the Mr. Robot cliche, the hacker in the black hoodie, it's really just looks like, to me, a bunch of kids. But that's also a cliche. When you look around the events, and I chose this picture because I just really want to know what the guy in the glasses, or both the guys in the glasses, are looking at, because both of them looked either properly concerned or stunned at whatever is being discussed in this briefings. But also, it's this. And I like this, and I just pulled these randomly from the BlackHat photos from just this year's event in the U.S. This one at least shows like a couple of women in the audience. And while we're not appropriately represented, we're getting stronger. In fact, there were 3 women in the BlackHat NOC in Singapore this year, and that was really nice, and in the U.S. one as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how many of us make it into the London event. I know Ruckus is taking 2 to London, but more than the fact that they don't meet the cliches, certainly the BlackHat USA event, which is we've just finished with, is and it is the largest event. It's represented by more than 100 countries, and so people come from all over the world. In fact, this year the attendees exceeded more than 18,000 people. But aside from the fact that we've got people coming from over 100 countries, at least to the U.S. one, and they're coming from all over the world for the other 2 events as well, the people who attend are basically anyone who cares about security, and it's a lot more people than you would think at first blush. And so I created this graphic just, well, one, because it was cool, but also because I got to use some of my favorite bywords. Of course, Petya and not Petya just this year, and Stuxnet in the last couple of years have been huge. We've gone from worrying about malware to the new phrase, the wipers, which was what we saw with NotPetya. But also hidden here in my little BlackHat graphic, I have Swift on security. So if any of you guys are active on Twitter and at all interested in InfoSec going forward, and I call her she, her avatar is Taylor Swift, and she's probably one of the single smartest people in the InfoSec side. So if you're at all interested in following any of this or just getting up to speed, I do encourage you to follow Swift on Security. But essentially, the people who attend BlackHat are anyone who cares about security, and you'd be surprised how many people that is. It's anyone in higher education. In fact, higher education may be the single most vulnerable, most targeted of the verticals listed here, if only because they tend to be a softer target, and they have a wealth of information, social security numbers, national ID numbers, and things, and also data, in terms of intellectual property and research and things like that. But also hospitality, NDUs, K through 12. Obviously, the public venues have to be concerned about it, all the way down to the federal component. So this is not just the FBI and CIA, but it's the all of the other nationalities involved too. And the FBI every year has a booth at BlackHat, and it is the single most crowded booth. And so, because just people are interested in talking to them and probably interested in getting jobs. But so the people who are attending BlackHat are representatives of all of these verticals, and it's not a coincidence that this is the same list of verticals. If you go to the Ruckus website, these are our key verticals. Walking through the hallways, walking through the training rooms, through the sessions, through the business hall, I ran into CIOs, CEOs, IT directors, InfoSec experts from every single one of these verticals, and they were all there to learn more about how to secure. They're from that vertical, or they were bars that service those customers. And as they walk through them, this is what they see. They see that the signage is here everywhere, and so this is a big thing for us, because you don't think of Ruckus when you think necessarily of InfoSec or for a secure network. Do you think of Ruckus when you think of the best Wi-Fi? Absolutely. Do you think of Ruckus when you think of the best networking? Because now we have the ICX switches? Absolutely. But the idea of us being there at BlackHat is a little bit, I get a few heads cocked at me and asking what it is and what's our story and why we're there, and that's one of the reasons that we're here. So this year, 18,000 people were walking around the Mandalay Bay Convention Center, and absolutely everywhere they went, they were seeing signs like this. So the word is getting out that we're there. In addition to 18,000 people from more than 100 countries, there are more than 300 different media outlets that are represented. And by the way, this right side of the slide is not there just, this is not an ego thing. This is actually there to let you know that we were pushing the story. I had a number of people come by and interview me. But the more important thing is that no matter how successful you are in life, no matter how good you get at what you're doing, there's a reason that God gave you teenage daughters, and for me it was so that I could send out a link to my interview and my children could say, wow, you sounded so smart, but oh my goodness, you look so old. You look just like your mother. So there's always a way to bring you back down to earth. Oh, and before I forget, I meant to tell you, I am not only am I talking to you from my awesome log cabin on the lake in East Texas, but I'm also talking to you from my office where I have multiple monitors set up. So if there are any questions, although you guys are on mute, if you want to put a question into the chat session, I will keep an eye on that over on the other side and try to answer it on the fly. So feel free to ask any questions that come up while we're talking. I know that you guys are from Asia, and there's a cliche about you guys too that you don't like to ask questions, but I love to answer questions, so I'm going to challenge you so that I get at least one question at some point during this session. Okay, so this is the who that attends it. I wanted to give you guys a look behind, and we call it the plexiglass curtain for the NOC, because this is actually a room in the convention center. So we set up this conference room and then build just to the side here is a plexiglass wall that walls us off. So you can come in and see all of our display monitors and see the NOC. You can see that we do have the mood lighting going on and everything. But it also means that anybody can come in and talk to us, ask questions. We'll come out and talk to you. You're free to take pictures as long as it's not, high resolution. But we really wanted to be, the NOC itself and the network that we provide for BlackHat is very open and transparent. So we monitor all traffic coming and going through our network, and we do take steps to protect the internal network so all of our devices are safe. But anything that's going out is not necessary. We don't do anything to that. For one thing, during the training sessions, you're actually maybe doing things that look hinky, but you're actually there to learn, and so it wouldn't be appropriate for us to do anything with that. But the NOC itself is very interesting, and I'll talk to you in another couple of slides about our SLA and what the expectations of the quality of service are. But for right now, I'm just going to start with, starting in 2017, these are the players in the BlackHat NOC. So at the very north end, Palo Alto provides the firewall, and that's doing a lot of our rate limiting and managing that, but it's also doing all of the firewall. RSA, and they've purchased a company called WatchGuard, have been the network monitors, and they've been involved with the BlackHat NOC for a while. Previous to 2017, for the last previous 2 years, Ruckus was the wireless provider for the attendees. So anything that happened any Wi-Fi that was in the common areas, and then during all of the briefing sessions and the business hall, that was all Ruckus. Previously, there was another vendor that did just the Wi-Fi for the training session. So it was a little bit weird. In fact, it was almost a little psychotic because you had the house infrastructure Wi-Fi, then you had the other vendors' trainings Wi-Fi for the first 4 days. They would pull theirs down, and my Wi-Fi would be in most of the areas, but then we had another, at least half of the area that we had to cover overnight that we had to roll out. So it was a little bit of a marathon of an event in terms of getting things deployed. Starting in 2017, that vendor, and I will not name names just because I'm Southern and so I'm polite, but the other vendor was fired from being involved with BlackHat. And so from anything south of the firewall, because RSA is just there for monitoring, but all of the network services south of the firewall are Ruckus branded. So all of my Wi-Fi ran across Ruckus ICX switches, and all of the traffic was either carried on the wired or the wireless side with the Ruckus access points. This year I used smart zones, two in a cluster, so we had active for that. We had, for the first time ever, I got almost all of the access points that I designed for deployed. We've had some challenges in the past for a couple of reasons. Network resources were strapped a little thin because of some of the shenanigans of that other vendor that I won't name. I will say that they are the Fisher Price of network switches, though, and so because they had so many stability problems, we had trouble just getting our access points out. But the other challenge, and this is not an uncommon event, at least in Vegas and in some other areas, the hotel infrastructure, the convention center infrastructure, is phenomenally bad. I can tell you that every year I go in, I pull up the floorboards, and every jack that was broken last year is still broken, and maybe some new ones are too. So it's a little bit of a challenge sometimes to get ports to come up. And it's just, we're talking about just between the wall plate and the switch port back in the IDF in the closet. Can be a little bit challenging. So in addition to the smart zone and then the port security that we ran across the ICXs, and by the way, this means that I had switch SEs, switch engineers from Ruckus, had to go in and deploy across the 3 floors of the Mandalay Bay Convention Center into more than 30 closets, including the MDF, which is down in the basement. We also wired the registration area because we used 802.1x security on the registration, because obviously that's where the money is going through, and we wanted to be very careful with that. In addition to that, And this is one of the really nice things about working for Ruckus, because not only do we bring world-class Wi-Fi, and I've had just a really, I've been put in some challenging positions, and my access points have never failed me. But in addition to bringing all of that to the table, when it's appropriate, we also go out and find the best partners. And for us and for BlackHat, that means RGNet. And this is a company that creates a device, and they sit between between the LAN and the WAN. In addition to being my, every server that I need, the DHCP, the DNS, all of that, they're also giving me per-device VLANing. And so this is what gives us some of the security that it has led us, and I'm going to say this out loud. I would appreciate it very much if you do not repeat it out loud, just because I don't need any more of a target on my back. But this is our third year, our fourth BlackHat altogether so far, completely unhacked. And RGNets can definitely take a bow to that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about their solution and how they have implemented that. I wanted to put this sign in. So this is a sign that sat right outside the NOC office. So when you were coming in to do a tour of the NOC, this is what you would see. And I just wanted to point out how much BlackHat and UBM, the parent company for BlackHat, loves Ruckus. The NOC team is, there is no such thing as pay for play. These guys are 100%, they go with strictly best in class. In fact, I will go you a little bit further. The Fisher-Price company came out with a checkbook in order to try to keep their place, and that was just something that they weren't going to do. And so it is 100% best in class. So they went with Palo Alto because there's no doubt about it. They make a very good firewall. But both Palo Alto and RSA have been platinum sponsors for BlackHat for years, because obviously this is, you know, sort of their thing. Ruckus pays absolutely nothing. We don't sponsor anything, and they stuck us at the top of that sign, and that was I just thought that was pretty funny. They go out of their way to every year to let us know how much they really love us. So let's talk about how I got started with BlackHat, because again, it's one of those head scratchers. It's not the kind of thing that, you know, normally you would think about with being synonymous with Ruckus. In fact, if you were going to think of any Wi-Fi vendor, aside from Cisco, because you got to always think of Cisco because they're the 800-pound gorilla, right? But if you're thinking of a Wi-Fi company and security, the one that has sort of positioned itself front and center as being the security Wi-Fi company is Aruba. And in fact, they were a vendor more than 3 years in 2014. They were the Wi-Fi vendor. They did not return in 2015. And if you buy me a beer sometime, I'll tell you exactly why. There's components to their solution that does not go over well with this kind of audience, and it's where RGNet allows us to come in with the same kind of security, but more or less in stealth mode, and so it allowed us to get in there. In 2015, I had run the Wi-Fi for Interop, also at the Mandalay Bay in Vegas. Because I think the Mandalay Bay in Vegas is like my own version of, it's my circle of hell from Dante. I wake up and I think, oh, wow, I'm back here. It's the Dante circle of hell meets Groundhog's Day. So if any of you guys have ever been to Vegas and you really like it, I apologize. It's not my favorite place. But when I first started with BlackHat, the Interop guys had basically come back to UBM and let them know how we had overperformed and overmet any of their expectations. And so when BlackHat needed a Wi-Fi vendor, they came to us. The SLA, or their expectations at that point, were, one, Wi-Fi is a nice to have. We told the attendees, we've been telling the attendees, there's going to be Wi-Fi. We'd really like to give them Wi-Fi since it's on the signs. We've told them that it's going to be there. The first imperative is don't get hacked. Well, I thought that was a no-brainer, but it turns out to be that's not as easy as it sounds. their interpretation of an awesome Wi-Fi environment was that people weren't complaining about it. That was it. If people don't complain about it and we actually have some Wi-Fi somewhere, then that's pretty good. The deployment itself, as I had mentioned, was difficult because the NOC gets built out, say, on Thursday. The network is supposed to go live on Friday night. Registration starts Friday. So classes start Saturday, and they run Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, with either two-day classes or one 4-day class. And then Tuesday night, all of the trainings end at 6 p.m. and everything gets, all of the training rooms, and there's about 70 of them, get switched over and become briefings rooms. So the first year, I had to wait for Fisher-Price Wi-Fi network to get ripped out on Tuesday night to then be able to deploy the rest of the Wi-Fi. So while I had access points in the hallway, maybe, I didn't have them in necessarily all of the rooms. So it made for a challenging Tuesday night. And this is after I've already been there for 5 days, monitoring and managing the other part of the network. So it was sort of a grueling environment. And then for the last 2 days, we needed to be providing ubiquitous coverage, so the other network would be gone entirely. And this is the part that is also the thing that surprises people, and certainly it shocks me. You're reading that last bullet point correctly. It is a PSK. So while I could argue, while a Wi-Fi engineer would argue with you that a PSK is giving you no security, and in fact is taking resources from the AP, and in a density environment, you really don't want that AP being challenged more than it needs to be. So you could make a pretty good argument for why do we have a PSK at all? And the answer is layer 8, because it doesn't look good for a BlackHat security conference to have an open SSID, even though we all know that the kind of people who are attending it, once there's a PSK, you've done the exact same thing. You've just made it a little bit of a sport for them, and that's it. But again, that's more of a layer 8 problem, and so that wasn't an argument I was going to win. So fast forward 3 years later, in the planning session that we started having for BlackHat USA, which probably started sometime in April. In the first session, the CEO or the general manager of the BlackHat NOC team said, and we're going to go all wireless. So in 3 short years, and really 2 short years, the BlackHat NOC team went from Wi-Fi is something that's nice to have to literally the quote was, we don't need wires, we have Ruckus. Now, the Ruckus Wi-Fi engineer on the call was not thrilled with that statement, because there's no Wi-Fi engineer in the world that's going to tell you that Wi-Fi is better than wired. We're never going to be better than wired. And anything that we can put on the wire, logistically, that's where it should go. But the decision was made that where we didn't, unless we absolutely had to have wires, so the registration area, we decided to do port authentication. So that part was wired. And then there were a couple of training classes that physically could not use wireless. So there's the SCADA classes, the classes on that have to do with how to secure your electric company, your electric grid, your water grid, your power grid, all of that. Some of those devices are, thank goodness, do not have Wi-Fi on them at all. So we still didn't want to get hacked, but now we're having to provide not just wireless everywhere from the first day, but we're providing wireless everywhere for even the training classes, and those training classes push some incredible amount of data, and we'll see that in just a second. We went from it's nice to have, and gee, if no one complains about it, that means it's awesome, to now everything's relying on the wireless, or almost everything's relying on the wireless, and so this network has to be 5 by 5 with 5 nines. The reason why I was able to pull this off and was not as sweating as badly as maybe I should have been is the last 3 bullets. First of all, we owned the network. All of my Wi-Fi, and by the way, in 2016, all of my Wi-Fi ran across Brocade ICX switches as well, because I learned my lesson the first year because the Fisher-Price switches kept going down, and it made my Wi-Fi look bad. So the second year I brought Brocade SEs and the Brocade switches. This year we actually had the new Ruckus branded ICX switches, but we owned everything until we hit at the north end in the MDF the Palo Alto firewall, and then that fed directly into two 1 gig links from CenturyLink, and we'll talk more about that because that's interesting too. But so we owned the network, everything wireless, everything wired was us. And also because we had ubiquitous coverage from, and I said 0 day, and I use that on, and yes, I know that's a InfoSec term, but I use that on purpose because we actually got our network up hours ahead of schedule. I mean, like way ahead of, almost a half a day ahead of schedule, because it turns out you don't need 20 network engineers if you have 2 that know what they're doing. And so we were able to get the network up and running that quickly. But also, once again, we brought our GNets to the table. And this is really nice because I finally get to say something nice about captive portals, while also demonstrating why you bring a Wi-Fi engineer to a Wi-Fi network. And the reason is because anybody who's ever stayed in a hotel knows that captive portals need to die a deep, fiery death. We hate them. They either don't load. You fight them. They don't work on this browser or that browser. And RGNet did something that was really rather clever, and they're not a very large company, and they're very nimble, so they were able to work on this and get this up and working. But the fact that they even had the idea was really cool. So let me start with, in the previous years, the way the Wi-Fi was handled for the training sessions. And remember I told you there's like maybe 70 or 80 training classes going on at any given time. And the Fisher-Price company that did not have a Wi-Fi engineer on staff determined that since every classroom, all 70 classrooms, each of them have to be on their own VLAN, because you want, for security reasons, you want all of these guys in each classroom. Classroom A needs to be able to talk to everybody in the classroom, probably. But we also want to make sure that they're not talking to anybody in classroom B, because let's face it, they're at a InfoSec, a hackers conference. Shenanigans are going to happen, and they do. Especially at BlackHat USA, it is the wild, wild west. These people don't play nicely with each other because they're there. It's their sandbox. They're there to play and learn. So they wanted each training classroom to be on its own VLAN. So Fisher-Price decided that the way to handle that was to put an access point in every single classroom. And as much as Ruckus grimaces and makes faces over putting a single access point in every single school classroom or university classroom, just imagine doing this in a training classroom at a convention center, because these walls are not made out of cinder block or brick. They are made out of paper mache. These are just the air gap, pretend walls that they fold in and fold out when they need to change up the structure of the room. So there's no RF attenuation going on. So now they've got not just the Cisco microcells that are the hotel infrastructure, the convention center infrastructure at the Mandalay Bay. Now they've also stuck their, what turns out to be really crappy radios, their access points, but they're doing one in each classroom, and each classroom is broadcasting its own SSID. So I can't think of a way they could have made this worse, except for that sometimes they stuck the access points in the floorboards, in the steel metal Faraday cages where the electric plugs are. And I know you guys think I'm making this up, but I'm honest to goodness, I'm not. They couldn't have done a better job of making me look good in comparison. So they're broadcasting an SSID for every classroom. Each SSID has its own VLAN. They've got access points in every single classroom. The RF environment is virtually unusable. And I know that because I would do over-the-air scanning. I would do some packet captures and look to see what was going on. And it was an absolute nightmare. I can also now completely vouch for the fact that RF and Wi-Fi poses no health risks, because if so, 18,000 men would not be having children after having been through what the Fisher-Price people had put them through. So here's what we did. Once all of that mess was gone, and this year we owned the network, we said, let's put the access points where they belong. We're going to put them where they belong in terms of coverage, in terms of density, and that's certainly not one in every classroom. So without regard to which classroom was which, I designed, because I'm now, heaven help me, very familiar with the layout of the Mandalay Bay Convention Center, so I can almost go in blindfolded and lay out the access points. But once we got that done, we turned to RGNet, and they had the brilliant idea. So they created a captive portal. So the landing page would pop up. We broadcast one SSID, whatever the training SSID name was. Everybody logged into that same SSID. They were given a captive portal, and we had sneaker netted passphrases out to each classroom. So every classroom, if you came into classroom A, you put in your passphrase, and that automatically VLANs you off into classroom A's for as long as classroom A, if it was a 2-day class or a 4-day class. But since that SSID was being broadcast on absolutely all of the access points, it meant that if you left the classroom to go have coffee, which was way down the hall, or lunch, you could continue working and hit all of the resources that your classroom was using, because you were still on the same VLAN and would be until the end of training. And so this was really great, and this is something that RGNet did for us, and it went over very well. So let's talk about some of the challenges with Wi-Fi in terms of, and this goes beyond what a regular conference. If you needed to set up the network for just a regular tech conference, there are some good and some bad things. There's density. There's all the usual suspects about how you're going to deal with things. There are some ironically not security-related challenges around BlackHat. Because so many people are paranoid, there's actually less of an uptake outside of the training classes. People don't get on the network as much as they would if they were at just a regular teachers conference or music event or even a tech conference. But because they're paranoid, they're also bringing their burner devices. So these are devices that they don't use in their day-to-day world. In fact, they may only bring them out once a year at BlackHat. And that means, ironically, I see more legacy devices at BlackHat than I see anywhere else. And so this is a little bit of a challenge, because while I still have been able to do OFDM only, I can't go strictly to 5 gig only, which is something I would dearly love to be able to do. Interestingly enough, and this happened last year, there was the first year in 2015, I saw most of the mobile devices were Androids, and by, say, 2 to 1. There were a lot fewer Apple devices. In 2016, BlackHat happened in July, and just a few months before, there had been a big brouhaha, and some of you may be aware of this, between the FBI and Apple in terms of being able to write code that would break the security of an Apple iPhone that had been used by somebody who had committed an act of domestic terrorism. And Apple refused to do it. The FBI said, okay, never mind, we figured out how to do it ourselves. And all of a sudden, within just a few short months, Apple devices became hugely popular, and they flipped in terms of numbers of the devices that I was seeing on the network. And you're seeing a lot more classes in terms of penetration testing and things like that around iOS devices as well. I always see at least 7 BlackBerry devices, and I know exactly where they are because they're on the access point that's over by the FBI's booth, and so I always, stop by and say hi to those guys. We have the pineapples, but forget about that. This year we also had aerial drones that had access points on them, and then this device that we found in a planter. So this is actually a 3D printed battery case. Why, I do not know, because some guys spent some time, and this is just a regular Wi-Fi card, generic Wi-Fi card, So this is just a sniffer, but he built this, I guess, in his mother's basement and brought it to BlackHat and threw them in the couple of planters. But what's missing of the problems that we saw is very interesting. I have seen 0 spoofed SSIDs. Do I see a lot of SSIDs out there that everybody's broadcasting? And in at BlackHat USA, a lot of the SSID names are not safe for work. I told you it's the wild, wild west. So there's a lot of hundreds and hundreds of radios, but I don't see anybody trying to spoof my SSIDs. We saw only one wireless denial of service attack that we thought, and it turned out to be user error on the part of a UBM marketing guy. So we haven't seen any of that. So as much as we see a lot of weirdness, we're not on the Wi-Fi side. I haven't had nearly the problems that you would think. I do have this guy running around periodically, and so forget a pineapple. This is the cactus, the Wi-Fi cactus, and this is 50 pineapples that he has done some custom JSON code for, so that he can walk around and scan. This is just scanning. He's not doing anything bad, but he can capture all of the data. And even if you're doing channel hopping, he is able to stitch all of that together. And that, by the way, is on a shoulder harness. So this is a big backpack. The dollar value of the hardware that we're looking at is probably enough that he could have afforded a down payment on a house, but everybody has to have their hobby, right? So this slide, this is a graphic of some of the threats that we saw on a daily basis coming from, and this is through the RGNets interface. The blue is the emerging threats. Gray were actual attacks. The green here at the bottom, and I'm very proud of this, and we'll talk a little bit about this in an upcoming slide. That's more than 20,000 connections. And I want to point out that the first day with the big blue, that's Saturday of the first day of training. So we have Saturday and Sunday, and then the last 2 days where everything drops off, this is where the briefings happen. So a lot of these emerging threats and attacks are happening specifically during training times, and they're actually legitimate, well, legitimately illegitimate work. This is involved with the training that's going on. The emerging threats is more interesting because these are domains that were set up probably specifically for training and have never been seen before. And so they're obviously involved with the trainers that set those up for that. And this is just a still shot of a video that I did just for my iPhone. This is one of the screens that stays up at the NOC that you can come in and see. This is OIP. And it's just a visual display of some of the traffic that we're seeing. So the green dots are TCP, the red is UDP, and the white is ICMP. And that was, and the size of the blobs have to do with they're relative to the size of the packets. What you can't see very well is that almost all of the traffic is coming from my wireless clients, and they're mostly being lobbed straight at our gateways. And so, and again, most of this is just passively sniffing at stuff and not really being malicious. So let's talk about the results, because it really doesn't matter if you have good security if your wired and your wireless networks aren't stable. Our network went up, I told you, hours ahead of time, and we had 100% uptime. We had absolutely no outages. So our network went up on Friday. The training started on Saturday morning, and we were pushing more than 2 terabytes every single day. The throughput spikes for the trainings were in the morning, so people would come in, and a lot of times, just to give you an idea of some of the challenges, so we're pushing a lot of data throughout the day, but it's spiking in the morning, so we're really stressing the network every single morning, because these guys are a lot of times downloading VMs from the teacher resources from the servers. And in some cases, well, in a lot of cases, these are VMs that are being downloaded across VPNs. And in some cases, those servers are located nowhere near Vegas and across some iffy links. I'm talking to you, Australia. And so there were some real challenges. So it's not enough that you give them solid Wi-Fi and a solid throughput above that. You have to deal with what they're connecting to on the other side. In red and in bold is something I'm very proud of, because this has happened in the history of BlackHat never until this year. Until this year, when Ruckus owned the entire network. They have always had a single, two 1 gig links that CenturyLink runs in that they load balance across. Twice in the mornings of, I believe it was Sunday and Monday morning, we hit the capacity. We actually ran into performance problems because we were exceeding the 2 gig backhaul pipe that we had. And so because of that, BlackHat is actually going to be switching to a 10 gig backhaul for next year. And the truth is, they've never hit that cap before, not because the demand wasn't there, because we all know if you give them the bandwidth, they will use it. It's because the network was never stable. In fact, last year on Sunday night, the Fisher-Price company did a firmware upgrade, something that all of us should just go weak in the knees at the idea of doing in the middle of a conference. It did not go well, and they did a firmware rollback Monday morning just as classes were starting. And you can imagine, if classes are starting and you're expecting to push 2 terabytes that day, and the network has rolling outages for the first 4 hours of morning, just how badly things were going. In fact, I can tell you quite honestly, there was vodka involved by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Not for me, because my stuff was up, but there were some people who were having some trouble dealing with reality that day. So the training sessions, we're pushing that much data. The spikes are in the morning. But remember, the training classes, I have some 70 to 80 training classrooms. Now, because I'm a Wi-Fi engineer, I don't have 70 or 80 access points that are supporting those. But I probably have 30 to 40, because some of the APs are in the hallways doing double duty, that are taking that load for me. And so they're spread across. In the trainings, during the training sessions, I never had more than 80 clients on any single access point, not just any single radio, just any single access point, because I had them spread so nicely. In the briefing sessions, now the one thing that saves me on this is that there's a lot less of an uptake. Even though there's a lot more people, the people who were using the network for trainings are now no longer using them, and the people who are coming in are only sporadically using it. So the number of users stayed about the same. I never had more than 3,000 users at any given time, even though we had 18,000 attendees. So you can, that's what I'm saying about the uptake rate. You can usually at a conference assume about maybe a 40% uptake rate, depending on where you are. If it's a younger group and it's a highly, if it's a Twitch conference, I would imagine it'd be much higher rate. For the uptake rate to be that low is actually one of the nice things, because it sort of gives us some breathing room. But even though I only had 2,000 people, the spike at the briefing session is at lunchtime, because during the briefings, they're not really on the network, they're paying attention to the presentations. When they're in the business hall, they're walking around talking to the people at the booths and getting their swag and things like that. When they're at lunch is when they catch up on everything. And remember those 18,000 attendees? If they're all in there having lunch, and I've got 2,000 people, even though I've only got 2,000 people, I have 18,000 blobs of water that are causing RF interference. And in the lunchrooms, I probably only had at most 8 access points, because they've got everybody in such a condensed area. It's like trying to cover a keynote area in terms of the challenge. And so in terms of design, that's also something that has to be taken into consideration. Okay, so the last little bit is just to get in some sexy quotes, because, and this is probably my favorite part of this, for the first time in years, it turns out UVM has a VIP party every Tuesday night. Remember what I told you Tuesday nights were like before this year? It's the night that we have to pull out the Fisher-Price stuff and throw in like 60 more Ruckus things to make sure that everything comes up. This year, we were all out of the NOC by 6 p.m., and every one of the, not me because I went to bed, I'm a good girl, but the rest of the NOC team got to go to the VIP party. I understand there was a lot of tequila involved. I'm really glad I missed it. But they all got to go to the party for the first time, and they were pretty happy. And because of that, we got a lot of comments like the ones that you see up here. And the Mandalay Bay IT team lead, his name is Doc. He has never spoken to me. He came up and clapped me on the back and thanked us for, he got to go home and go to sleep at some point during the network too. But also we got these quotes, and these are from the actual BlackHat NOC team. And so they have definitely shown us some love. I do want to point out that I have never been able to do this on my own. I'm the Wi-Fi engineer and the main designer for it. Eric is the local SE, he's just unfortunate enough to live in Vegas, and so he has to come out every year. And then Jason and Matt are both SEs from the professional services team from actually both coasts, and so they came out to Vegas and switched out and helped me out. We'll be in London, and that's a much smaller show, so it'll be me and Simona from our TME team. And if you guys have seen the recent bake-off that we gave out with the performance of the R610 in comparison to everyone else who fell down as soon as you put video across the AP, she is the team lead for the director for that team, and so she's going to be in London. If any of you guys want to come out to see us in Singapore next year, we will be there in March, and I'd be happy to see you. And then with that, I have actually powered through, maybe I had a little too much caffeine. I have powered through my hour presentation in 48 minutes, leaving plenty of time for anybody who wants to ask me any questions. Not to put the pressure on you, but yes, there's the pressure. And I'm going to start calling out names. Carl's going to absolutely have to ask a question if he hasn't dropped already. I guess he did. Now I get to make fun of him for doing that. It's because I said something about Australia. That's why he dropped. And Zoe, are you seeing any questions?
Seems not. They're all good. I didn't see any questions.
I didn't expect any. You know what? It's because it's morning for you guys. You needed to have an extra cup of tea or a cup of coffee.
And the ideas are relatively new to the audience, I believe. Yeah, it's the first time we hear about it for the partners.
Oh yeah. So we may have to do it again, huh? I always like to hear something 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I just saw some feedbacks. Thanks, we don't have questions, and great sharing. This is what I saw from the Q&A. Yep. So with this, maybe we can wrap it up, and then we appreciate for any questions after the call, and feel free to send us email, and we'll be sharing the recording and the deck very soon. Right. Yes, I'll get the deck out. I will be writing a blog about this coming up. I just frankly haven't had any time. If you guys may have noticed, we had a little bit of weather problems out here in the U.S. And so I've been working with a group. Ruckus has been instrumental in working with a group that goes in, IT professionals go in and rebuild networks for schools and communities, and also disaster relief centers. And so we've been a little distracted by that. But I'll be doing a blog for that. And as well, if anybody has any questions you just want to ask me offline, everybody at Ruckus is first.lastname at ruckuswireless.com. You can email me. I am heather.williams@ruckuswireless.com. And in fact, if you're still online, I'm going to go ahead and just enter that into the chat session so that you have that. I have had people who just really didn't want to ask a question during the session, or didn't think about it until right after I hung up.
and I'm very happy to answer questions at any time.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather, and thank you for everyone to join the webinar. Okay, I'll see you guys next time in the next webinar. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.